power of science declares evolution is knowledge. In the 70s post-structuralist pervert philosopher Michel Foucault's book, The Order of Things, he wrote about philosophical conceptions of evolution long before Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck was an 18th and 19th century naturalist like Darwin, but he had an alternative theory. Lamarck believed that traits can develop and change throughout an animal's lifetime, then be inherited by their offspring. Darwin believed in less inheritance and more randomness, basically, to oversimplify. Evolution by natural selection happens more slowly than Lamarckian evolution. Lamarck's theory includes direct inheritance of specific traits that change over an animal's lifetime. For Darwin, traits can be directly or indirectly inherited. Evolution can occur in a wider variety of ways. Traits can be inherited randomly and indirectly. They also don't change over the course of a being's life. It takes a hell of a lot longer than that. Foucault also gets into evolution in terms of knowledge and power. Remember that to Foucault, power is always a tool that can be good or bad depending on who uses it. During the Enlightenment in Europe from the 1600s to the 1800s, institutions such as the church or religion, government, and science used power to spread paranoia about unusual people of any kind being sinful abominations. They also locked up an enormous amount of them, like included gay people, poor people, Jews, gypsies, homeless people, etc. Science declared them as biologically and medically flawed. But oppressed people can also use power for good by overthrowing or at least tamping down science, church, and state power. And it doesn't have to be one of those two polar opposite types of examples. Power is not simply good or bad depending on whether it's used by so called good or bad people. It depends on the circumstances. People are complex, man. Foucault argues that the theory of natural history is inexorably connected to language. I think he kind of means evolution there. I think that's true about everything, though, since we invent words for all objects and life forms. And so, rationality and good grammar won't help us taxonomize different species, Foucault says. But since grammar is obviously a part of language, to me, it's related to natural history or evolution. The theory is centered around the arrangement of knowledge. When Foucault says knowledge, we need to remember that he always connects it to power. He sometimes even calls it power knowledge. Given the fact that we know about Foucault's thoughts on power, we can see what he's talking about here. Which is that knowledge is also power. It is spread through power. This is how people convince us that something is true. They call it knowledge. Those in power decide what qualifies as knowledge. The knowledge of Darwin's theory has been spread through the power of the institution of science. Lamarck's theory was not accepted as knowledge by the institution of science. That clearly doesn't mean that Darwin was wrong, though. I'm not just like this terminally contrarian, internet fucking stupid MAGA sycophant person. So it clearly doesn't mean that Darwin was wrong. It's just how human narratives work, and it's how power works. Foucault said that the theory of natural selection could be looked at in a different way because naturalists, or today evolutionary biologists, use a faulty a priori claim. This type of claim is one that I mentioned before, which is one that's taken for granted. It's assumed to be true and supposedly doesn't need to be justified or proven. So, biologists' a priori assumption is that the current methods of studying evolution uh, are how we will continue to make progress. That's the only way. Foucault seems to be implying that some alternative and rejected theories like Lamarck's can be attempted. Maybe we're missing something due to a subtle difference in the theory. Who knows? If the methods are going to change, this way of finding knowledge must be spread through the power of scientific institution if you want it to change. I'm certainly not saying that we should reconsider Darwinian evolution by natural selection. As usual, Foucault is just has interesting thoughts on it. Is he an evil evolution denier? Definitely not. He's just a contrarian shit disturber. He's just being deliberately provocative with his language. He's saying that the institution of science use power to determine that Darwinian evolution by natural selection is a fact. All we need to do is remember that all we need to remember is that the power of science also discovered and proved evolution, but it's still true. The power of science declared evolution is knowledge.